Welcome, this is another Lightroom workflow editing video. Yeah, I know it rolls off the tongue, don't worry about it. Today I want to switch gears and instead of doing another self-portrait in nature, I'm going to do a self-portrait in the studio. And I'm not doing this because it's cold outside and I don't want to go out and shoot. It's because I want to showcase the challenges that you might face while editing photos that were took with very saturated RGB light. And before we jump into Lightroom, let me take a minute of your time and show you my light setup so you can have a better understanding of the scene. These right here are all the lights that I've used in my most recent photos. First, I started with the white wall and bounced an LED strip onto a V-flat for a soft, deep blue background. On the other side, I have this LED strip that is pulling double duty. First of all, it's an edge, creating this highlight on the side of my face, and it's also purposely spilling onto the wall to create a nice pocket of light. My third light also plays two roles. First is my cyan key light, and it's also providing this nice sketch light because it's so close to my face. And because all my lights are behind of me, I have one more RGB panel right behind the camera as a fill light. But the photo is not complete. There's one thing missing. Today's piece of resistance. This bendy RGB tube. And now, let's jump into Lightroom. And this is the shot that I got out of the camera. As always, first step is just to get rid of the Adobe Color profile. And I'm going to go with camera standard for this one. And we can see that the light balance is leaning heavily into blue. And this time I'm not going to try and find a neutral starting point because this photo is stylized and is not going to have a neutral white point in it anyway. But what I can do even with a stylized photo like this one is use the white balance to get more details out of this very blue zone and also enhance the red flare over here. This way the focus of the viewer will be on my face. So I'm going to increase the white balance just a bit and add a bit more green because right now it's all blue. Another thing, I'm gonna drop the contrast just a tad, increase the shadows, also decrease the highlights just a bit. I'm doing this to get more details out of the raw file, and I'm going to come back and add highlights back in here so you don't see the individual LEDs. I'm also going to add a bit of whites as I see there is some space over here. I don't have a good idea where I'll go with my edit right now, so I'm just doing the basic prep work. And I'm going to continue with a few masks in order to get the exposure that I want out of this file. First, I start with a radial gradient. First one is rather global to add light in the zone, and I'm going to stack it with one more, so duplicate mask, and I'm going to intersect this one with the subject. This way my first mask will provide general exposure in the area, and the second one is for more granular control on the face. On this one, I'm also going to add a bit of sharpness. This is going to help later on. And right now I'm just roughing stuff out, so I'm not going to put a lot of time in how my mask is positioned. Next up, there is a bit too much light spill on my chest, and I don't want the attention of the viewer to be right there. So I'm going to use another radial gradient and just tone the light down over there a little bit. And I'm going to add one more radial gradient over here just to add back some of the light in the RGB strip. This again I'm going to tackle later to make sure it looks good, but right now I want to have a nice exposure across the entire image. And to help me with that, I have a new preset. This one will be for grabs on my store, but it's so simple that I would strongly encourage you to make your own. It's called Visual Help, and what it's actually doing is creating a mask that's covering the entire image, and in this mask I have the saturation set to -100. I also have another preset called Visual Help Off that is toggling the mask off. Pretty simple, you can make your own or you can grab mine from my preset store and support the work that I do with these videos. Now, why would I want to get all the saturation out of the image and why do it in a mask? I'm doing it in a mask so it can be easily turned off and on. Pretty simple. And I want to remove all the saturation in the photo so I can easily see my exposure without having the colors influence my perception of light and contrast. And with this turned on, I know for sure that I want more light on the face, so I'm going to increase the highlights a bit more. I want a bit less light in the beard, so I'm going to contract this mask and move it upwards just a bit, but also increase it so it won't be an exact edge over here. And overall, I want a bit more light in the very dark areas of the photos on the left side, so I'm gonna bump up the blacks just a tad. I'm also going to add one more radial gradient coming from the bottom left of the photo. And in here, I want just a bit more contrast with highlights increased so the flare is more visible, but at the same time, I want the jacket to be rather dark. And another thing that's easier to do with this mask enable is cleaning out the skin. I'm not gonna make you watch this, so let's speed it up. And with that done, I'm gonna toggle the mask off using the preset. And let's finally focus on color. As you can see, I look like a Smurf. And that's not the look that I want. So the first thing that I'm gonna do, I'm gonna look through my film emulation with color response curves. I'm going to apply the color response curve from either CineStill or Vision 200D. I know for a fact that these film stocks have nice contrast. They are designed to work with this kind of blue tones, and they're going to provide a very interesting hue in the cyan department. And using the same mask on my face, I'm going to add a lot more green to amp up those hues and also add a bit of color temperature and reduce my contrast just a bit more to get the nice cyan highlight over here. I don't want my photo to go into green, but it's a narrow edge over there. I'm also going to add a bit of green in my shadows and play around with the primaries to see what happens on each of them. I do like how the light changes in the face when I push the red hue into magenta. And to compensate for that in the entire photo, I'm going to push the other way the blue primary. What I don't like is the new hue that I got over here. And I'm gonna add one more mask to nudge it back in place. I want red and orange tones, no magenta over here. So just a bit of hue shifting and it's back to normal. I'm gonna add one more radial gradient to amplify this light that I have in frame. And now let's finally deal with the very saturated tones in the photo. The best tool for this is the HSL panel, no doubts about it. But before that, let me apply a Filmic Tone limiter. This is another one of the tools that I sell on my website, and it's applying a mask across the entire image with a Filmic Tone curve on top of it. Today I want a subtle one, so I'm going to go with either one or actually I'm going to go with level 2. The curve that it's applying looks a little bit like this. Very subtle, but it's enough to leave the black point of total black, nudge the whites down just a tad, and have a more overall filmic tone to the entire image. Now let's focus on HSL. In the hue department, what I don't want is this green over here. So I'm gonna slide the cyan channel into blues and also the blues just a bit towards purple. I'm also going to nudge my purples towards blue to group together all those cold tones into a more bluish tone in this other half of the spectrum on the warm colors. I want to do whatever is possible to make the brightest part look as yellow as possible and to have it toned down towards red. So I'm sliding the orange channel towards yellow and I'm going to play around with the red channel just enough so it looks red but it doesn't fall into magenta. But I'm going to pay attention to the separation over here so I don't create banding in the area between purple and magenta. Usually, if you drag it too much, something like this, you're going to create a shift over here, and that's usually manifesting as a band between the colors. In terms of saturation, I want to drop the saturation in the blue just a bit, but not too much because this will also mean that the green is more prevalent. And to help with that, instead of using HSL, I'm going to create one more mask for this cheek right here, where the blue saturation is really strong. And I'm going to add a bit of warm and a bit of magenta tint to it because I don't want it to fall into green. Going back to HSL, I want a bit more luminance in the red zone. Going back to HSL, I want a bit more light, I think, in the orange channel to help me blow out this strip. And I want them to be brighter as well. This will help me give the band a more futuristic look. And I don't really care if I burn it because afterwards I'm going to come to HSL and use the highlight slider to inject a bit of color into the very bright spots so the white is not really white in the image. Overall, what I'm trying to achieve is to split the image in 4 zones, like this. Over here, we have more yellowy orange tones. So the opposite of that, it's blue. And we're gonna have over here blue tones. But I want my light to be cyan, and the opposite of cyan is red. So I'm going to try and push all these zones so I can have a nice gradient going from one to another across the entire image. This way I can create contrast on the diagonals like this, and I'm gonna get a more interesting color distribution across the image. So I'm gonna push a bit of deep blue into the shadows, a bit of orange into the midtones, and my highlights are going to be cyan because of the upper part right here. Now let's add a few. I'm also going to tweak my mask because here I still have oversaturated blue. And to do that, I'm just going to go to point color and do a bit of luminance and a bit of reduction in saturation just on that zone and on that specific tone. I'm gonna reduce the range, and also I'm gonna darken the area just a bit. I'm gonna tweak this other mask as well to add more light into the image, and also going to increase the area it's working in to create more contrast. And I'm going to add one more mask over here to enhance the red tones, and just going to add a bit more saturation as I already have the red tones over here. And I'm gonna use one more mask to add a bit more shadow back into the beard, but I'm trying to keep this one really subtle. I think what I've done is I've added too much warmth to this lower part, especially with this mask right here that you can see is going a lot into the beard. So maybe I should subtract a radial gradient from it as well to maintain the shadow into the beard. And I think there are like two more things to do to this image. I'm gonna do a bit of cleanup of this light that's going through the beard because these spots are really contrasty and I find them to be distracting. And the other thing is I want to add some grain. But to be able to do this, I need to remove some noise. And I'm gonna go the old route and do some luminance and a bit of color, and hopefully that takes care of most of the noise in the image, maybe just a little bit more. And now I'm going to apply my all-in-one grain. I'm going for 400, even though I would like the granulation to be a bit bigger. But I'm going to increase it here and also add a bit more general grain just to give the image some texture. What I can notice after applying the grain is that I lost quite a ton of sharpness. But instead of adding it to the entire image, I'm going to go in my masking zone and just cancel the sharpness reduction in my highlights and lower it in the midtones. This way I still keep the organic aspect of the film, but without adding sharpness to the entire image. You know, on film, there is not a lot of sharpness in the shadows, and I want to keep it like that. It's more of a technical accuracy that's something that a viewer will see, especially on a social media platform. The image is mostly ready. I kinda like the look of it, but when I turned off my main light over here, I realized that the face is really green and that there is not a ton of details in this side over here. So to address the green part, I'm just going in my face mask and going to reduce the amount of green that I've injected with the tint slider. I clearly overdid that part over there. To address the sharpness thing and the amount of details that are visible, I'm going to create a new mask, a radial one, and I'm going to drag it over here. And what I'm going to do is add a bit more local contrast or clarity. Around 20 should be enough, and a bit of texture as well. I'm trying to basically target the midtones, maybe a bit more clarity to increase the sharpness in here. And I think the photo is pretty much good to go. This is the image that I started with, and through a lot of masking, I've ended up with this one that you see on the screen right now. I know this is not going to be for everyone, and that some people are going to hate the green on my face. It's an artistic choice, and what I really hope is that you learned something throughout this video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, maybe check out my preset store if you want to buy something and support me, and dear Space Cowboys, I'll see you in the next one.